Okay, good morning everyone. Try to make it a bit louder. So now it should be better, right? Okay. Hi, welcome to the appointment planning lecture. Does anyone have a question regarding the exercises, lecture content, organizational things? Yeah, please. Okay, I check it again. So the short solution, right? Okay, thanks for the hint. Yeah, I will check it. Yeah, thank you. So I've also seen some comments in the forum, in Ilias forum. And so basically it's for you guys so that you can discuss and ask questions among you, but so that you can help each other. I just jump in if I see that something wrongly or something incorrect was written. Okay. Otherwise it's for you basically, okay, to ask questions among yourself. Okay, then let's start with the appointment planning models. So before we go into the mathematical details, we have to understand appointment model itself. So what kind of decisions we have to take in appointment models. So first of all, and this is one thing we have to ask ourselves if we are a physician, a clinic, a hospital, whatever, can we accept or should we reject a treatment request or patient request? And then if we accept this patient, we have to decide which time slot to choose on which day. So this can be done after collecting several patient requests, after some kind of cutting off time, or we can instantly assign patients when they are calling. Okay. So the problem is, of course, you have to decide now or after collecting that, and what is for sure that you will face some kind of disruption, some kind of emergency patients or whatever. So you always have to adjust the planned treatment time. So for instance, you assigned the patient at 10 and the other one at 10:30, but the emergent patient requires some kind of more treatment, longer duration, then there's no time slot available anymore. Right? So we have to deal with some kind of adjustments of the plan. So what is definitely sure is that your plan is not sure. Okay, so you will face some kind of uncertainties. And the best way would be, of course, if one model considers all of these three decisions at the same time. However, this is not possible simply because of complexity. They are mathematically so complex that state-of-the-art solvers like Roby, Cplex cannot solve these problems in a reasonable time frame. Often you need these decisions, especially the adjustment decisions, in the morning maybe or during the day, so you need them pretty fast. Okay. And most literature on appointment planning, if you look in the literature, they are either access models or schedule models, and we will have a look on these two types of these models. So let's start with the access models. First of all, we consider rather a longer time planning horizon. So for instance, we want to plan for the next upcoming 4 weeks or the next month. And the main decisions are, do we accept or reject the patient? If we accept them, then we have to understand and to decide when to treat the patient. And this is done on a, let's say, on a daily basis, so not on an exact time slot. We know the patient should come next Wednesday, but not at 10 or 11 or something like this. This is not what we have to decide in these. Just the decision, shall we accept the patient request or not, and when shall the patient come. So the objective is to optimize capacity utilization or to minimize indirect waiting times. And these models are often modeled as a Markov decision process. So a Markov decision process is simply a mathematical framework used for decision making, basically in situations where the outcomes are partially random and partially under the control of the decision maker. So someone knows maybe the Markov property. What does the Markov property say? What does it say? Do you remember from bachelor's? It's dark, right? Somewhere in the back. So basically it states nothing else that the future state of a process depends only on the current state. Okay, so the future is independent of the history and of the past, which is pretty convenient for mathematical modeling because you only need to know what the current state is and you don't need any kind of historical information. Okay. Which makes often sense because the next patient and the treatment of the next patient is often independent of the previous patients. Okay. Morning. Okay, so the decisions on the time slot. First of all, we have to decide if the patient should come next Wednesday, Friday, whatever. But the decision on the particular time slot is then assigned on a later, maybe on the same day. And this is another step. Okay, on the other hand, we have these schedule models. In contrast to the access models, we consider a small time horizon. Basically, we consider 1 day. And we have a number of fixed, most often identical patients to schedule for this particular day. So 3 patients in the morning, 2 patients after lunch, and so on. Okay. And here the objective is to try to minimize the over, the idle, or the direct waiting times. Okay. This is because we have, of course, a high level of uncertainty we have to face. Okay. And this is due to uncertainty often modeled as a stochastic integer linear program. So we have some kind of template schedule. So we know 3 patients are coming from 10 to 11, 3 patients coming from 11 to 12. But the actual assignment, so the actual assignment of a particular patient, Peter, is assigned to 10 o'clock slot. This is also done later. So for instance, for surgeries, okay? So the actual assignment happens then later, okay? Okay, so the problem with access and schedule models is that on one hand, the access models often do not consider uncertainty, also not in treatment durations. So they assume always deterministic, so that they know, the physicians or the decision maker knows how long the treatment will take. So this is the reason why they cannot consider some kind of idle time or over or direct waiting times, because they think everything will go as planned. And on the other hand, the scheduling models, they often consider identical patients, so they don't differentiate between some kind of preferences of the patients or my complicated medical historical diseases of the patient and so on. Also no-show rates. We had it last time that physicians face often a high number of no-shows that complicates the entire planning, because then we have a high number of idle slots. Okay, so the idle times increases, or the idle time increases. Okay, so that means an assignment of a specific patient to a specific time slot is not supported by both models, neither by the access models nor by the scheduling models. Okay, so we cannot use them to know patient 1 should be treated at 10:30 in room 1, something like this. So this is not supported by these models. And there are also very, very few models in the literature that really deal with disruptions. Okay, so often uncertainty or some kind of events, mass casualty events, for instance, natural disaster, whatever. These kind of more significant disruptions are not considered in most of the models. Okay, so let's start with a case study, or with case studies in general, because when you formulate these kind of mathematical models, you always have to show somehow that these models are working, also for practical applications. Okay, so therefore, if you look in papers, you will always see at the end of a paper some kind of numerical tests using a case study. Okay, and a case study basically tries to investigate in detail real systems and try to find some kind of improvement potential. And for when you talk about optimization models, we try to test these models based on real data. Okay. So we could use simulation, so we can gain insights into the system, because we test different scenarios. We try and play around with different capacities and different parameter differentiation to understand how the system changes. This is simply because we cannot go into a hospital and change the layout, or simply say, okay, you need more devices, and then let's have a look how the utilization will be at the end of the day. It's simply too expensive, and in some cases it's simply not possible to realize it in a real system. So you cannot simply change a hospital. This is why often simulation is used to play around with different parameters, with different layouts of hospitals, for instance, and to check what if. So these are simple what if analysis to understand the system. What could be improved? Where are the potentials? Where maybe the bottlenecks in the system? Okay. And what could also be used is queuing theory, also very popular. And queuing theory simply studies the behavior of queues or waiting lines. Okay. And so we want to understand systems where customers, or in our case patients, arrive randomly to our hospital, and we want to analyze factors like the average indirect waiting times. So how long does a patient need to wait between the request and the real appointment, the actual appointment then at the end, or the queuing length if the patients are coming into the emergency department. How long do they need to wait? How long is the queue before and after them? Also their service rates. And so the problem here when we are using queuing theory is that we focus rather on stationary results, simply meaning that we assume that, for instance, the arrival rates or the service rates, the treatment times remain constant over time. Okay, so obviously this is difficult in real world situations, and that means that it's difficult to integrate dynamic, for instance, working hours or overtime, okay? Because it's fixed, which makes the analysis and the solution of queuing systems easier, of course. But on the other hand, we have these difficulties with integrating dynamic characteristics. Okay, so a few years ago, a radiology of a German university hospital came to Professor Nicker's team and asked for help because they wanted some decision support. They wanted to increase the number of MRI scans in their radiological ward and didn't know exactly how to do that. And what we know is that MRI scanners are very expensive and highly utilized devices. We know that the treatment durations till the MRI scan is done could be very long. Okay. And the hospital asking for help was a very large campus hospital. So campus hospitals simply mean that they have different buildings where the patients or the medical equipment has to be transported between buildings. So we have some kind of transportation services and logistical challenges also there. And the objectives, I'm sorry. So I have asthma, this is why sometimes my voice simply breaks, I apologize for that. So the objectives, and that was the crucial point, is that they didn't really know what the objectives are, okay, for the hospital. They asked for help, but they not really knew what they want. Okay, so possible objectives were to understand, first of all, the entire process from Professor Nichols' team, obviously. So how do they assign appointments? How variable are the treatment times? How is the patient flow within the clinic, between the different buildings? Also, the behavior of patients. Are they punctual? Do they have some kind of issues with our MRI scans? Are the machines really used in a more efficient, most efficient way? Do the patients have to wait? And of course, where are the bottlenecks? And additional objectives were, and this was obvious, they wanted to try to understand where are the potentials for optimization, so that they can develop some kind of suggestions for improvement, so that the clinic can implement these suggestions, and that's the point, right? What for? Do they want to minimize the waiting times? Do they want to improve the efficiency of the utilization and so on? So this was the core issue of this project. What they wanted to understand, first of all, is the process of appointment planning, especially for the elective patients. That means patients are calling, asking for appointments, and they get in 2, 3, 4 weeks an appointment. So electives are always those patients who get an appointment, different to emergency patients, for instance. Okay, so the process is a simple one. So they get an appointment, and depending if they are outpatients, so if they are outpatients, right? If they are outpatients, they come directly to the clinic, to the MRI, radiological ward. If they're inpatients, then they need some kind of transport. They will be picked up by the particular building and brought to this radiological ward. Then they have to wait in this waiting room, and then they're called for information. So basically patients that are then informed about the risks of the scan, what they have to do, they have to sign documents and so on. Then they are sent back to the waiting room. They have signed everything, and then the treatment can start. MRI scan is done, and they can leave again. So if they are outpatients, they can instantly leave. If they are inpatients, then again they need some kind of transport, waiting in the room. Then they're picked up, and they go back to the building, okay, where they are admitted. Okay, basically a very, very straightforward process, nothing fancy, nothing very complicated. And then they asked the clinic for more detailed information, for instance, about the duration of the transportation time, so between patient is picked up and the waiting room. So the clinic could provide that, but the problem was that how long the patients have to wait for the transportation is, they don't know. Okay, they didn't collect it, they simply don't know. And overall, what they know is that, for instance, the calling for the information, so informing the patient about the risk takes, let's say, 10 minutes, signing the documents. This is fixed, and this is what they know. And they also know the pickup between when they're done to the building back, but everything in between, the clinic didn't know. So, and okay, if they don't know how long they wait for the transportation, okay, somehow it's could be reasonable, understandable. But the crucial point was that they don't really know how long the MRI scan is really taking. So how long is the duration of the MRI scan? This is what they simply didn't know, okay, and didn't collect. Okay. So what Professor Nichols' team did, they used students to go into this clinic and collect the needed data, how long it will take for the patients in the waiting room, how long the MRI scan takes, and so on. So they had an observation of more than 350, okay, and what they observed was that the appointments were between in the morning 7:30 till in the evening 8:30, and at really good days they had at most 14 patients per day and device. They had 2 MRI scans, and they always had a predetermined size. So if a patient called to ask for an appointment, they assigned to this patient either a 1-hour slot or a 2-hour slot. Okay, and often these patients had to wait really long for an appointment, 2 weeks up to 6 weeks, so long indirect waiting times. And we had overtime. So occasionally they had to do this MRI scans even after midnight. An idea why? Why could it be? So the last appointment was 8:30. Okay, someone is maybe taking longer, they have delays, let's say 9:30, but after midnight, do you have an idea? Why do they have sometimes such a huge overtime? Yeah, please. Yeah, delays, maybe due to? Due to? Yeah, definitely. So the delay is proceeded one by one. But why could it be that we have a delay? Some ideas? Why could we have, why cannot we do this as planned? What could happen in a clinic? Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. And also, for instance, if you have a surgery planned, scheduled for the next day, the problem is that everything is delayed. Not only the MRI scans, but also the surgeries are then delayed. So what they are forced to do is not to have the surgery delays. They are forced to do the MRI scans, the diagnosis, now. Okay, otherwise they cannot do the operation on the patient. Okay, and that could have higher impact than simply having overtime in the clinic. Okay. Okay, so that means it's not only that it's dangerous for the patient, but also that the length of stay is then longer, and they try to try at least to reduce the length of stay over time. Okay, what they also observed is that we often had low utilization, so sometimes MRI scanners weren't used for 2 hours. We had long waiting times, so direct waiting times for patients. So they had an appointment at 7:30 or whatever, and had to wait 2.5 hours till they could be treated. Okay, so there should be something going wrong. You know, there are some kind of problems involved, and we have to figure out what is the problem. What could be the bottlenecks maybe, or something that is not working efficiently. So the questions were, and that was coming from the clinic, then that they said, okay, it's demand related, because they come, they don't come, and we have a fluctuation in demand, and also we have a lot of emergencies, so this delays the entire plan or entire schedule. And our question was, is it rather poor organization and planning? However, it was worded differently in front of the clinic, obviously. So the question is it really demand related? We know that we have really huge, long waiting lists for elective appointments. So actually, the waiting list is so full that even if we have idle times, we can call and let come in the patients. Okay, so there's enough demand, let's say, to fill all our schedule, and so that cannot be, and they have to wait up to 6 weeks. So demand is there. That cannot be the problem. Okay. Can it be that we have too many emergencies? Okay, we checked how many of these over 350 appointments were electives, and this is the majority. And then there's some minor, so for instance, no-show 5%, but emergency is up to 2%. So that cannot be also the explanation. And they were asked if this is a true. It could be that only the 350 appointments were somehow not real numbers, but they confirmed that, so they don't really have many emergencies here. So the most of them are electives. So patients are calling in and they have to come at a particular time and slot and day. Okay, so that cannot be the explanation. So again, the question cannot be some kind of organizational planning issues. And what they checked was the planning, the planned schedule made by the clinic. And do you see something strange or something striking? So this is how they planned the schedule. Would you say that's optimal? Yeah, please. Do you mean, are you talking about 2 different MRI scans, or are you talking? Mm-hmm. That's true. This is, no, that's excluded. This is simply the treatment time without preparation and follow-up treatment. So when you simply look at this schedule, would you say that's optimal? Yeah, please. This one? Yeah, so they couldn't answer this question why they assigned 2 patients at the same time for the same MRI scan. Exactly. So you have to know that this was made by hand, and obviously mistakes are happening if you don't use some kind of digital support. That could be avoided. Not entirely, obviously. Also, digital solutions might have mistakes, but if you do it by hand, if you're tired, so if you're human, then things like that could happen. Something else? So there's this overlap. Can you see something else in the schedule where you think that might be not very optimal? Yeah. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Although this is not seen here, you're absolutely right. And of course, you could think of to put these longer durations back rather to the end, and having some time left, some kind of buffer, if you start with shorter durations at the beginning. Yeah, that could also be something else. Yeah. Exactly. Who knows? Yeah, who knows why they used a gap there? So they also couldn't answer that. So there's a clear gap also. where the MRI is idle, okay, and no patient is assigned to this. Yeah. Mm. Yeah. That could be, and that was not the case for this particular clinic, because because of the high demand, they wanted to utilize the MRI from morning till evening 8:30 as high as possible. So, but that could be for another clinic, that could be a case, but not here. So they had not this kind of breaks, or some kind of forced breaks. There was always some kind of stuff to handle these MRI scans. Okay, so planned overlap, down here the gap, and this is the real and actual waiting times, and we have to differentiate between waiting times and examination time. So waiting time, the appointment of the patient starts at 7:30, but of course the patient, often patients come earlier, okay, and have to wait. So also this question, right? The patients there, the appointment is at 7:30. Why do they start at 8:45 or whatever? So why is this delayed? Okay, why is the treatment start delayed here? Okay, something else that striking. So blue is waiting time, yellow is the actual treatment time. Something you can see that's also strange. If you compare what is planned and the time the MRI really takes. Yeah, please. No, that the patient is waiting. So blue is the patient comes in, waits, and then when the yellow starts, then the treatment is starting for the MRI. So the patient is simply waiting. Yeah. Here and here, exactly. Exactly. Here we have that. And also the question, if here the patient, if this is a no-show, and the next patient is already there, why not assigning them and treating them earlier? Right. So this is the next question. So we asked for that. We knew that this is a no-show, the patient didn't arrive, but the question still remains why the next patient, although the patient was already there, wasn't treated. That was a cancellation made by the clinic itself. Maybe the patient was not ready for the MRI scan. And here there was a disruption. So what could happen that, for instance, a patient is panicking due to claustrophobia or something like this, and the treatment cannot be processed. Okay, so that can also happen. And also that the real duration times often didn't match the planned one. So here, especially here, it's much shorter than planned. Okay. So why assigning a time slot of 2 hours if the treatment time is less than that? Okay, so that means we have a lot of idle times. Okay, so if we sum up the idle times, okay, then you can see here, because of no-show, we have almost 1 hour of idle time. MRI is standing still, is not working. Due to our cancellation, we have again a 1 hour stopping time, okay, and the MRI scanner is not working. Here, the duration was longer planned than the actual treatment was, so we had an idle time of more than half an hour. Okay, so what we can see here is that the planned duration is longer than the actual time is. we have we have no-shows, but still we could adjust the planning. Here it's not done. We could have some kind of cancellation. So at the end we have many and long idle times. And the problem also that all examinations are carried out on each MRI, could be carried out on each MRI scan, but what they are doing is that if the patient is calling, they assign the patient to a particular MRI scan, okay? Except it's some kind of emergency, obviously. So we have a queue for MRI 1, we have a queue for MRI 2, and we have, and this is the third MRI scan they wanted to include in their ward. And the problem is, if one device breaks down, okay, how to adjust that then, okay? They are so fixed that they cannot simply take one patient out of this line and simply assign them to another MRI scan. And this missing flexibility between MRI scans, although MRI scans are absolutely the same, and also patients can be treated by or using MRI scan 1, 2, or 3, it doesn't matter. But because they're so fixed, they cannot easily adjust to cancellations, to no-shows, to disruption, whatever. Okay. So, and we know from queuing theory, this is not optimal. Okay. And also another process weakness is that they observe that the fluctuation examination durations are between 13 minutes and 164. Okay? But what the clinic is doing is only assigning either 1 hour slot or a 2 hour slot. Nothing in between, not more, not less. Always this fixed time slots of 1 and 2 hours. Okay. And what we've seen here is that there are no patients really needing 60 hours. You can see rather a T distribution, I would say. So the majority is less than 60 hours. Okay. So then the question, why assigning 60 minutes slot if the duration times are less? And 80 appointments, they were planned for 120 minutes, but again, there was not even one patient. All the patients needed less time, and there was only one outlier with 164 minutes. So there's also some kind of weakness, okay? That doesn't fit. The 1 or 2 hour slots do not fit to the real fluctuations, okay, of the durations. Okay, and then third one, the problem is that the preparation, so getting the patients ready for the treatment needs about 10 minutes. And that could be done in parallel. But what they are doing is they wait till the patient's leaving, the MRI scanner is free, and then they start to prepare the patient. Okay. Getting some kind of contrast media and so on and so on. Some kind of maybe headphones or something like this, which takes about 10 minutes. But they are waiting till the MRI scan is idle, is free, and then they start with the preparation. And you can see here that always at the end, this is done. So we sum up, this is a minor thing, but still we sum up idle times. Okay. And the fourth weakness they observed is that although the first appointment is between 7 and 7:15, they often have a team meeting at 8 a.m. That means that the patient is there, but they start to treat the patients only after the team meeting, which means that the team who's doing the appointments, they didn't know that they have a team meeting and they don't work before that. Okay, so there's also missing communication between the different decision makers, let's say, okay, between those who are doing the assignments, doing the schedule, and those who are carrying out the schedule. Okay, so they simply wait till the team meeting is done. So we often observe that although the patient had an appointment at 7, they start at 8:15 or whatever. Okay. Missing communication is often a problem not only in clinics, okay, but in different industries. Okay, so we had several examples to show that that cannot be optimal, neither for the patients, not for utilization of the MRI scan. Okay, what they used was a discrete event simulation using the software Pro Model. I think this is not really highly sophisticated anymore nowadays, at least not often used. And they tried to understand where the weak points are in order to make suggestions for improvement. So they played around with different scenarios. What if we change this, and what if we change the capacities, the schedule, whatever. And then they compared these scenarios, trying different improvement approaches. Okay? And what is very important also to visualize the impacts, to visualize the results, because humans are better in understanding pictures than pure numbers or mathematical formulations. And the benefit of simulation is that we can test strategies, different strategies of patient flow control before we really implement that and deploy that in a hospital. Okay? So we are playing around with these impacts without having real costs in real life. Okay, so that was how they used the discrete event simulation in the hospital. So who's familiar with simulation in general? I'm not asking for content, I just want to know if you had some kind of touching points with simulation techniques. No one ever had simulation in bachelor's? Okay, not in the bachelor thesis, okay. Okay, so discrete event simulation is basically a system of nodes and edges where nodes represent, for instance, doctors or machines, MRI scan, for instance, with the corresponding statistics. We know the examination times, for instance, and the edges are simply transport between these the different clinics, for instance. Okay. Okay, so the patient ward, this is the inpatient, so they're coming from some kind of building, and the outpatients are coming from the park lot, so they're coming from outside. Okay, and we have the Department of Transportation Service. These are necessary for the inpatients, and here this is our radiological department. So the pickup or the cars picking up the patients and bringing to the ward, to the waiting rooms, and bring them back after the treatment is done. Okay, and as I said, the outpatients are coming directly to the ward. Here are different waiting rooms. Do you know why? Why do we need different waiting rooms? An idea? Cannot they simply wait in the same room? Yeah. Exactly. So physically, that could be one waiting room. But for the discrete event simulation, we have to differentiate between the patients. So that means we need one waiting room where they arrive, where they need some kind of consultation, basic, the general, first of all, I'm here, giving the card and so on. Then we have this second waiting room. This is assigned to patients who need the information, okay? And then a third waiting room where they're waiting when the information and documents are signed, and then they have to wait for the treatment using the MRI scans. Okay. And then, of course, we have the reception desk and the physician room. Maybe afterwards, there's some follow-up treatment, talking to the physician again. And then we have different, again, nodes. So we have the consulting room where the patients are informed. We have the first MRI scan. We have the second MRI scan. And we have a special room where the patients are getting ready for the scan. Okay, and the patient's way through the system is simply that they go to the reception, then in waiting for the consultation signing the documents that they are informed about the risks, then going to the next waiting room and waiting for the MRI scan. Then they are prepared and either going to the first or the second MRI scanner. Okay, so this is the patient flow through the clinic. Okay. And then when they are done, they are leaving either as an outpatient going to the car, driving home, or they are picked up by the car and brought back to the building. Okay. Okay, so what kind of input data we had? We know that 1/3 of all the patients were inpatients coming from some kind of building within the clinic, and the 2/3 of our patients are outpatients coming from home and just coming for this MRI scan. We are looking at the queue as a first come, first serve. This is pretty common to use that. We have 3 MRI devices, and the punctuality of patients, we assume that is normally distributed, so often they are coming earlier, and we assume that inpatients coming due to the transportation are not that early than outpatients. Outpatients are often coming earlier than the appointment is, with some kind of variance. And then we have to differentiate the duration of examination. So there are times that are dependent on the examination, which is the direct machine time. We are using different distribution types for this. And then there are examinations that are independent of the examination itself. Okay. So for instance, the lead time, so coming in and leaving the hospital again, some kind of follow-up time, maybe the consultation via the physician at the end after the MRI examination. And we checked the literature and seen that gamma distribution is most often used for that. So it's simply giving or describes the time until a given number of events, given number of patients occur in a Poisson process. We will come to Poisson process a bit later, and gamma distribution are often used to represent the distribution of waiting times between 2 events. Okay, so between 2 patients are coming in. Okay, so that was what the model was feeded with. And when we come back to this basic flow of patients coming in, treated and going back, and we now know the necessary information. We know how punctual the patients are. We know that the information giving to the patient is constant, about 10 minutes every time. We know that so waiting in a waiting room before they are called in for information, this depends on the queue length. So depending on how many patients are waiting in front of me, it will take more time to be informed. And also the same here. So the entire second row here, so starting an examination, ending, and so on, this also depends on the queue length. Okay? So how many are in front of me, how many patients are behind me. We also know now at least the distribution type about the examination time itself. That was not known before. And the time till the patients are brought back to the building, okay, so intralogistically perspective, this is not considered for our problem because this doesn't influence our appointment scheduling. Okay, so this is extra. Okay, so the improvement of Professor Nichol's team was, first of all, to merge the queues and not having separate queues for each MRI scanner, but having one queue and then assigning them flexibly to one of these 3 MRI scans. So from the queuing perspective, we know this is the more optimal version. Why then do you always observed, for instance, supermarkets, you have still these kind of queues, parallel queues. Do you know why? Why? If it's known that one queue is fair and more optimal, why do we still, for instance, in supermarkets, do have these kind of parallel queues? Idea? Yeah. Exactly. That's true. So it's basically also a layout problem, right? So you cannot have one queue through the entire supermarket. Okay. Then what they also suggested was not to have fixed slots of 60 or 120 minutes, but having rather flexible time length based on the patient characteristics. So it doesn't have to be 47 minutes, so it can be 40, 50, so in 10 minutes time slot, that's fine. But to go from these fixed time slots to flexible ones. And the third suggestion was not waiting till the MRI scanner is free and idle, but preparing the patient parallel to the MRI scanner preparation. Okay, so then I'm not waiting till the MRI scanners are free. Okay, and of course you can suggest many things, but you also have to show and to justify that these were really improvements for the clinic. So this is not only that you feel that, but it has to be justified by numbers. Okay, so they implemented all these 3 improvement suggestions, and what could be seen is that we had a 60% high utilization rate, which means the MRI scans were 2.5 hours more used than before, which makes almost 40 hours per week. Okay, and the throughput, and that was what for the clinic was very important. They could now treat 2 patients on average more per day and per MRI scanner. Okay, which makes 30 patients per week more than they could treat before. Okay, so because they have this kind of long waiting list, of course they are interested in reducing these long waiting lists, long waiting times for the patients, and to treat as many as possible. Okay, so what could also be achieved, and that was very good for the patient, is that we had over 50% reduction in waiting times for the patients. Okay, that means we have less LOS, less length of stay, because we could, for instance, do the surgeries earlier or on time. We have, through the higher utilization, less idle times, okay, because we use the MRI scans more than before. Okay. So they really like that. Okay. Okay, let's start with appointment systems before we going into the mathematical details. What kind of appointment systems do we have? Because they are characterized by appointment rules, patient classification, and also adjustments. And here we have to differentiate when we talk about appointment rules, because every clinic, every physician could have a different appointment rule. And these are based on, do we have what kind of block size we have. These are the number of patients scheduled to a particular block. Okay, so we have, let's say, 1 hour blocks, and the size is always 5, so we have always 5 patients per hour. This is our block size. We could have a beginner block, a starting block at the beginning of the day. It could be beneficial, I will show that in 1 minute. And the appointment interval. So do we have flexible or fixed interval between 2 successive appointment times? Okay. So it's, for instance, every 1 hour. Or is it 1 hour, then half an hour, then 45 minutes, then the next one is again after 1 hour. Okay. Then we have to classify patients. Okay. So either because the service time depends on the patient characteristics, because of age, gender, whatever, historical medical history of the patient. So therefore we could reserve certain blocks to certain patient class, because we know they need more treatment time. Okay, or we could also adjust appointment intervals, because we know, okay, this is simply initial talk with the patient. It takes 50 minutes and that's it. And the next time we really have the consultation time, that has to be longer. Okay, and of course, as we always know, no plan will work. This is why we need some kind of rules for adjustments, some kind of, maybe rules of thumb, that we know what if emergency is coming in, if we have high rate of no-shows, how to deal with that. So we need some kind of rules for adjusting the plan, because it will never work as planned. Okay, and by the way, urgent patients and emergencies are indeed different. Emergencies are life-threatening, whereas urgent patients should be treated as fast as possible, but there are no life-threatening consequences for that. Just as a short explanation. Okay, so we remember our scheduler models. We know that we try to assign patients to one day. So, for instance, five patients to the first hour, 3 patients to the second hour, and so on. And our objective is to minimize over, idle, and direct waiting times, because we are facing uncertainty. Okay. And as we said before, we have some kind of appointment rules. These are very simple ones that are very easy to understand, to follow, and they define this kind of template schedules. So again, so the real appointments are done then afterwards. Okay, when we're talking about appointment rules, we had this differentiation, right? Appointments. We have to decide on block size, if we want to have a beginner, so initial block or not, and do we have fixed intervals or flexible ones. And here we have to differentiate between the block size, the interval, and the initial block. Okay, so the block size could be individual. We want to see one patient per interval, for instance. We could have groups of the same size. Or we could say, okay, the first hour we have 3 patients, the second hour we have 5 patients, and so on. So we have variable block sizes over the entire, let's say, day. The interval between appointments could be fixed every hour, or could be variable. Okay, so half an hour, then 1 hour, 2 hours, whatever. And we could consider a starting block, but we don't have to. Okay. So why? It could be beneficial to have an initial block at the beginning of the day. So that was a study from 1952. That was about queues and appointment systems, also in hospitals, and they focused on waiting times, but not waiting times for the patients, but rather for the physician, how long they have, so that the physician has to wait for the patients. And this is a very popular and famous Bailey-Welsh rule. They said it is beneficial to assign at the beginning, so we open at 8, so just starting with 2 patients at the beginning. So 2 patients are coming at 8, and then we have a loop assigning 1 patient to all other blocks. So every, let's say, 15 minutes, 1 patient is coming. So why could it be beneficial to assign here at the beginning 2 patients? What do you think? By the way, they proved that also mathematically, that is beneficial. But what could be the reason? And this is often done nowadays also. Yeah. Exactly, simply because of no-shows. So even if one cancels or simply doesn't show up, then we still have 1 patient in the queue. And if a no-show is somewhere here in the middle, then it's still good, because we had a backup patient at the beginning. Okay, so this is not a crucial point here. So this is why it's beneficial, at least from the physician perspective, to have more at the beginning, and then having less patients or regular patients during the entire day. Okay, so the pure focus was to avoid idle times for the physician at least. Okay. We could have it even worse. So if we say, okay, we have only one single block, so my entire day is one block, and I ask all the patients, and here we have an example. For instance, we have 16 patients within a working day of 8 hours, and we give them all the chance to come at 8 o'clock in the morning. Okay, so all 16 patients are coming in, and the physician is working on all of this patient by patient. So it could happen that they wait for hours till they are treated. Okay, but this is an example for a single block. And of course, we don't have an interval time. Okay, the interval time is always between the blocks. We could have an individual block, meaning that per block only one patient is coming. So that means, for our example, we let every fixed time interval, we let one patient come in. Okay, so we compute average time you need per patient, and then divide your working day into equal blocks so that you have a constant A here. Okay, so that could also be done. Or we could have different appointment and rules. So for instance, we could have individual block versus fixed interval, so we showed that. Or you could have multiple blocks where you say, okay, in each block we let 5 patients coming in. Again, with a fixed interval, we could have interval within the initial block, without an initial block, and we could also have variable block. We say, okay, the first block we accept 5 patients, in the second 2 patients, and then maybe 2. This is beneficial to deal with fluctuations. That could be a reason, and it depends what is optimal for your particular case. Okay, so on the other hand, we have the patient classification. Okay, so we have to differentiate the patients based on some kind of characteristics, because patient characteristics have a direct influence on our mean service duration, how variable are the service durations. One patient class needs less service than others, but sometimes you don't know. It could be that it's done easily, but it could happen that there are some kind of complications, although the illness is the same. Okay, so we have some kind of variability in the duration time, and of course we might have a high probability of no-shows. That has to be included in our analysis, and we can use this to, for instance, introduce different appointment length for different patient classes. We could use some kind of buffer times, because we know if we have high variability of service duration, we need some kind of buffer to deal with this uncertainty. We could overbook, because we know we have high rates of no-shows. We could simply, as an airline, we could simply assign multiple appointments for the same time slot. Or we can reserve time blocks, but because we know certain patient classes, they need some kind of more time than others. Okay. Okay, and the third block was just, yeah, please. Yeah, absolutely correct. And this is why we rather focus on hospitals and clinics where they have more freedom of choice than, you're absolutely right. GPs, they simply overwhelmed by the demand and tries to get rid of the patient as fast as possible, if they are not some kind of complicated cases, obviously. Exactly. Okay, so you also have to understand where is it worth to check. If the more complex the system is, the more potential for improvement you have. Okay, obviously. Okay, so if it doesn't work as planned, as it is always, then you have somehow to adjust your planning. So you need some kind of adjustment rules to deal somehow with no-shows, walk-ins, urgent or emergency patients, and also if you know that you have over or unpunctual patients. So an example was our MRI scheduling. So you have this perfect scheduling at the beginning of the day. You know that patient 1 to 9 is, or patient 1 to 5 is assigned to MRI 1, and the remaining patients are assigned to MRI 2, as it was at the beginning. So this is the idle plan, no idle times, everything goes smoothly. This is of course not the case. So we start, let's say, punctually with with patient 1 and patient 6 on MRI 1 and 2. And then there's some kind of either no-show, no, it's not a no-show, but the 7th patient comes too late, for instance, so we have an idle time. We could have an emergency patient that who has to be placed in between because he needs some kind of urgent diagnosis before going to surgery. So everyone else is then delayed. Okay, so here we have the official end of consultation time, but obviously we have them to do overtime. Okay, so therefore we need some kind of adjustment rules to deal with these unpunctual patients, no-shows. Here we also have unpunctual and then emergencies. Okay. I think of if I should start with the next one or not. Okay, I would say I won't make it till the end because the exercise is also okay. Let's do 5 minutes, and then we start with the mathematics next week, because I think I will need more time to explain these probabilities. Okay, here we start with the actual optimization model, and we want to schedule a fixed number of patients on one day, and patient can be scheduled at the beginning of fixed time intervals. We have no consideration of patient classification, if they are unpunctual, if we have walk-ins, and we assume that the distribution times, or the service times, are exponentially distributed. We assume, because we think of a queuing system, we have one server, that means one doctor, one MRI scan, one medical device, whatever, so one server. And we try to minimize a linear function of waiting time, idle time, and tardiness. Tardiness or lateness is simply the delay of the treatment. Okay, so basically we want to minimize overtime that the physicians have to work. Okay, and you should know, I assume that at least, you should know how an optimization model is constructed, right, from the bachelor's. Who doesn't know the basic blocks of an optimization model? No, yes, no, no, no. Okay, you're indifferent, or you cannot simply remember. But you had operations research in your bachelor's. Oh, okay, fine. Okay, so just a reminder, optimization models always contain parameters. This is simply the input. Can I write? Let's try. So, oh man, I will need more than 5 minutes. So this is input. Okay, so this is what you give the optimization model. This is what you know. These are time intervals, so you know that you have an 8-hour day. You know the length of one time interval, let's say 1 hour every time, and you know that 16 patients want to be treated on this day. You have to schedule all these 16 patients, and you know that your service durations, you know not directly the service duration, but you know that at least they're exponentially distributed and they are independent. This is a reasonable assumption because you know that the treatment time of one patient is independent of the other one. Okay. So at least idle. Okay. So it only depends on the illness itself. Okay, and variables, or if to be very precise, decision variables, this is the output. Okay. Sorry, that it's really not that easy. So this is the output. Okay. So this is what your model gives you at the end of the day. Okay. And then obviously you have to have some kind of an objective. So for this particular optimization model, you want to minimize the overall times consisting of a waiting time, the idle times, and also the lateness. Okay, so you want to minimize the overtime you have to work. You want to minimize the idle time where you simply sit and doing nothing, and the waiting times, waiting for the next customer or next patient in our case. And then you have to wait these waiting times. So for instance, for one physician, they don't care if they have a lot of idle time, but they think, okay, overtime is, for me it's worse, then I would like to have a higher weight for the overtimes, the lateness, than for instance for idle times. So the decision maker can decide which waiting or which time type is more relevant for them. Okay. And alpha should be also be here. So because the weights are input. My goodness. Okay, so alpha. Okay, so it's also an input parameter. Okay, so if you would give this model into a software solver, Cplex, Gurobi, what would the solution be? If you just give it like this, and you want to know what is the solution of X, how many patients to schedule per time interval? So what would be the solution? If you would do this like that, if you would give them your Cplex this optimization model. What do you think? You try to minimize your times, and all these times are dependent on the number of patients you are assigning. Yeah, exactly. So if you would give it like this, the solver would simply say no patients at all. Because if you don't assign patients, you don't have waiting time, you don't have idle time, you don't have overtime. You simply have 0, 0, 0. Okay. This is why it's necessary to also include constraints. So the first constraint is that you would like to minimize the time types, but under the condition that all these 16 patients are treated today, okay, are somehow assigned during your 8-hour shift. Okay. And for this particular case, we want to have integer number of patients, okay, and T is from 1 till capital T. Okay. Okay, if we use our appointment system rules, okay, so our rules is variable block, okay, because you have to decide, or the clinic has to decide, how many patients per hour, let's say. Okay, so we have a fixed interval. This is A in our, okay, this is A. So this is fixed interval. This is that one. And okay, let's do this. And this here is our block size. And this is what we want to decide. We don't differentiate between the patients. Every patient is the same. And we also don't have any kind of adjustment rules, because we don't consider any kind of walk-ins, unpunctuality, some kind of uncertainty. We don't consider that here. And we simply assume a first come, first serve, a rule. Okay. Okay. And here we also don't consider no-shows, but in our exercise, we will then extend this model to also consider no-shows. Okay. And I think, I think I would stop here, because I think I will need more time for that one. Okay, then I would say thank you very much for your attention, and see you next Tuesday. But just one minor thing, because we didn't cover the probabilities and so on, we won't have an exercise sheet, so I won't upload an exercise sheet only next week. Okay, because the content will be covered next week only. Okay, so that's it. Thank you very much for your attention.